Thank you, everyone, for praying for us. The first chemo treatment went really well. I've had very minimal side effects. You know, when Laura and I go to the doctor or have chemo treatments, it just gives us a chance to pause and ask the question, what's going on? And I just wanted to share with you a little bit of our conversation that we've had together, that God's really prompted some deep things in our heart.
Well, in this whole process, in the very beginning, every time we got the least little bit of good news, we would get encouraged, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not because the news in and of itself was necessarily great, but just because of what we thought it signified for the future.
Mm-hmm.
And the least little bit of bad news would have the opposite effect. Not because you felt any worse on the day we got the bad news, but just because of what we felt like it signified for the future. So very early on, the Lord corrected me to say, hey, if you get excited every time we get good news and you get discouraged every time we get bad news, it's going to be a long, bumpy road. But instead, like Jesus told the disciples when they came back rejoicing that the demons were subject to them, he said, do not rejoice in this, that the demons are subject to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. I think we've done a pretty good job, actually, of trying to do that all along this journey. But what I've realized more recently is it goes beyond just choosing to rejoice or not rejoice. You know, the tendency to rejoice in good news and to get discouraged in bad news is because we think that it's a predictor for the future. But in reality, it isn't, because even if we have bad news today, God's
able to overcome that.
He's a miracle working God. We know He is. He is. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And even when we get good news, we don't know what's going to happen next.
Right.
And so it's a false, good news is a false assurance. It's a false place to put our hopes.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. So I've been thinking about just trying to, and kind of like what we talked about. What's that, everybody? Just trying to think in terms of planning for 30 to 60 days, planning in shorter increments of life. Because we don't know. Good news doesn't mean we have 3 years, 5 years. Bad news doesn't mean we have a shorter amount of time, right? Makes a big difference to think in shorter segments. It adds clarity too.
And I would like to have great news and not have to think about all this at all. But I really don't want to take the future for granted.
I agree. We don't want to take the future for granted. I think that's been one of God's greatest gifts to us. Not taking the future for granted. The first thing we're thinking about is what Jesus said. Jesus said, in Matthew 6, don't be anxious about tomorrow. Each day's trouble is enough for itself. And we're just trying to live in each day, in each moment, trying to say this day is enough. Let's not worry about tomorrow. Let's not worry about the entire cancer treatment. The second thing that we're learning is to start planning in shorter segments. Psalm 90 verse 12 says, teach us to number our days that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. We don't know how long we have. And so now we're planning in 30 and 60 day increments. And it's becoming, I think, wonderfully freeing for us to say, let's live with purpose for 30 or 60 days with a very set number of days and see what God might do. And would you believe that what God's doing is He's not only accelerating the work of things like 24:14, He's doing it in spite of our circumstances, and sometimes even because of our circumstances. Like Paul said in Philippians 1, that the circumstances that are around me have actually served to further the gospel.
So, all of you guys who are praying for us, praying for Steve's health and all of this, thank you. We appreciate it so much. We feel very, very loved. I don't want you to get overly excited when we have good news or overly discouraged when we have bad news. Neither is a predictor of the future.
Big thing I hope that you'll hear is you don't have to have cancer to decide not to take the future for granted. I encourage you to live for each day in and of itself, to make strategic use of your time in shorter increments to say, let us present to you a heart of wisdom. And don't take the future for granted. God's got amazing plans. It's Jesus' great commission. It will never change. And whatever he does in your life will be a furtherance to the gospel if you let it be. We love you guys and appreciate you so much.
We don't know what's going to happen, but we do know our names are written in heaven. That's all the assurance we need.